Good afternoon, everyone. This is Richard Ottinger, President of the Virginia Bar Association. Welcome on behalf of the VBA to what I think is going to be a very interesting and hopefully very helpful presentation. First, I want to thank the Young Lawyers Division. This is an example of what they continue to do in terms of putting on top shelf, high quality programming that really proves day in, day out the value of the Virginia Bar Association to our members. Today's program, I'm sure, is going to be fantastic. Having practiced through at least 2 economic downturns, I'm really looking forward to hearing the presentations from the panelists today, who have all given the topic a lot of really good thought. So thank you all for attending. Enjoy the presentation. I'm going to hand it off to Hetal and Alicha.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You may see in the chat, but I just want to mention before we get started that if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we will save some time at the end to go over some questions. As we get started, I want to introduce a couple of our panelists. Monica Monday is the managing partner of Gentry Locke. Gentry Locke has offices in Roanoke, Richmond, and Lynchburg, and she has been our managing partner for 6 years, right, Monica?
Trying to unmute. 9.
9 years.
Feels like 6, right?
Time flies. Time flies when you're having fun. So we're grateful for her here to give us kind of the perspective of a medium to larger size law firm in Virginia and how that size firm is able to weather disasters. We also have with us Daniel Colston. He is a certified financial planner at American Financial Planning here in Roanoke, and he's going to give us some perspective as a financial planner on what individuals and businesses can do when disaster strikes. Hetal?
I'm going to introduce Jennifer Ligon. She is going to be one of the panelists who's offering some insight from the young lawyer's perspective. Jen is a healthcare attorney. She's a partner at Williams Mullen in Richmond. She focuses her practice on transactional and regulatory matters. In addition, she routinely provides general business and employment related advice for physician groups. I've had an opportunity to work with Jen quite a bit with the Virginia Bar Association, where she's actively involved, as well as with the YLD, the Young Lawyers Division. She was the past chair of the YLD last year, and we look forward to hearing all of the great advice that she can give our members. We also have Benjamin Leigh. He will be offering a lot of insight from the small firm perspective. He is a partner at Atwill, Troxell, and Leigh in Northern Virginia. He's a former law clerk to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia. He works with clients on a variety of business and real estate matters. Ben really has a really great reputation for offering a lot of creative solutions and business strategies in the area of business and financial areas. So we definitely look forward to hearing all of the great advice that he has to offer today.
All right, so we'll jump right in with our first question. So obviously the pandemic caught a lot of us a bit off guard. So understanding that no one was 100% prepared for the pandemic, the question is, how had you and your firm prepared your practice and business for disaster prior to the pandemic? And we'll start with Monica.
Sure. Thank you, Alicha. And I'm really pleased to be here today as a former YLD. I love it that you all are doing this program. So, you know, like most firms, we had a business continuity plan and hoped that we would never have to use it. But it's good to know that you have something when you need it. This particular crisis, though, really was, I think, one that stressed firms' technology resources. And if you had good technology in place and good technology staff and resources, then that was the key to surviving at least the initial stages of this particular crisis. So I think number one, it did turn out that technology was important on this one, because most firms just had to turn on literally on a dime in order to get their workforce working remotely. Other things are things that maybe we don't always think about in terms of preparing for a crisis, which is, does your firm and do you personally have a line of credit? What does your debt look like? Are you able to manage your debt for a period of time after you hit a financial crisis? And then your cash reserve, I know Dan's probably going to tell us, gosh, you need cash on hand. Same thing for a law firm. You need to be in a position where you can weather whatever kind of crisis comes. But unlike some prior crises, this one really was focused, I think, on technology, how to move your people, how to make them safe for a long period of time. And no business continuity plan was going to help you completely solve all those problems, but definitely having one and having the training, the people trained for it, is really what was most helpful for us.
Thank you, Monica, for that perspective. Ben, what about from your perspective, from a smaller law firm, what had you all done to kind of prepare for disaster?
We had sort of planned by accident our way into being technologically ready. We had been losing a lot of days for some of our employees that commute to the office west from here, and had particularly heavy snows. And on sometimes we would close the courthouse, and that left the question, should we open up the firm? So we had implemented remote work technology, and that saved us when this came about. It was different from, I think Monica and I talked a little bit in preparing for this. This crisis was different from maybe the last crisis we had, where 2008 financial, that hit certain practice areas very heavy. It hit real estate, it hit financial, secured lending, but it wasn't as widespread. This was widespread, and it meant you needed to be nimble and also flexible and exercise some grace with how your colleagues are trying to work. And then, we all had to learn how to do things differently very quickly. One thing that I think will show you that the crisis kind of has caused people to think about how to do things. E-signatures are becoming very, very important. E-notarizations in the world of finance are becoming something that we talk about, whereas before a lot of people didn't really consider it. It was forced upon us. So we were fairly well prepared. And then the financial part of it, Monica raised, is very important. And we're only an 8-lawyer firm. We've been a 4-lawyer firm before. And the joke in small firms is when things are going great, we do okay. And when things are poor, we still do okay. So that's a decent outlook to have when you're careful with your finances and you're not over leveraged and you have maybe emergency lines of credit.
And both of those answers segue really well into our next question. Hetal, if you want to take that one.
Thanks, Alicha. What is your best practice advice? And this is a question for everyone, for an attorney or a firm that's trying to actually plan a plan to sort of survive a pandemic such as this one. How about we start with Monica?
Sure, thanks, Hetal. So I would reiterate a little bit what I talked about earlier, which would be just on the financial side. Get your house in order. Have that emergency line of credit, like Ben said. Manage your debt. Make sure that your debt is going to be very manageable, and also take a look at whether any future debt you're going to be incurring, and whether that is something that you're going to be able to manage for a potentially long period of time if you experience a drought. And also having cash on hand, that's also really significant. And then I really think that training and being prepared for a whole variety of things that can go wrong. When I indicated before, I think we all sort of had prepared for what happens if there's a hurricane or a tornado and all this stuff, but preparing for the arrival of something that I don't think really any of us had realistically anticipated, certainly put us to the test. But as Ben said, flexibility, adaptability, and also not, I guess this is one of those areas, Ben's right that it's not like the last economic downturn that we had. It's different, but I think it does also prove the point of don't be a one-trick pony. We all live in a world of specialization. It's important to specialize, but you've also got to have other things that you can do in the event that you cannot do what you're going to do. So, if you're a litigator, you can still litigate, but guess what? You weren't going to have jury trials for a year. So are you practicing in a discrete body of law where it is conceivable that things could shut down for you or really dry up? And if so, I always encourage our lawyers to have, 2 or 3 things that they do well, that they can shift to in times when things get slow. So for me, when appeals get slow for me, I also represent doctors and healthcare providers. And so I do 2 separate things. So really build on that, build on what, being flexible, being adaptable, and finding other things that you can do in the event that you experience a downturn, because you really don't know which direction it's going to come from. So I think that, looking in that direction and making yourself indispensable in a number of different areas.
Thanks, Monica. Appreciate that. Jen, do you have any insight that you could provide just from your experience working at Williams Mullen and seeing how they prepared?
Yes, I have a sort of a firm-centric thought and then an employee-centric thought. So from a firm side, I know when everyone had to go home essentially at the same time, there was, to Monica's point about technology, a big fumble to try to get enough hotspots. So it's pretty granular, but some people have great Wi-Fi connectivity and some people, depending on where they live and their resources, do not. And obviously in this day and age, most people rely on at least being connected to the internet to do their job, if not needing printers and faxes and everything alike. So from a firm resources standpoint, whether it's having a stock on hand or if that's not economically feasible or smart, knowing how to quickly get it on hand so that you don't lose time and being able to serve your clients. Because even though there's a pandemic and you may be working from home, clients' needs continue. So I think that was one of the biggest things for me. I remember that day that I left and was my last full day in the office. I needed to get my hands on a hotspot, and I was fortunately able to, but I know that there can be a shortage. From the employee side, also to Monica's point about being able to pivot, I work in healthcare, and so we saw that very quickly in what we do. We still had all of our client projects that had been ongoing, still ongoing as COVID hit, but then also all of our hospitals and physician groups needing to, mainly the hospitals needing to apply for the emergency beds. And then a few weeks later, all the PPP advice. So being able to pivot while still doing what you were doing pre-disaster, whether it's a pandemic or otherwise, but really listening to your clients' needs and being able to quickly address those needs and figure out how to answer their questions when it's not something that you've been doing for weeks, months, or years. So just maintaining that flexibility. And I think one thing that Williams Mullen did well, that I'm sure a lot of firms did, is quickly pooling resources from a variety of practice specialties, because a disaster, even in the 2008 context that may target certain practice groups more than others, is still going to bring in a lot of collective resources. So all of the employment expertise and the healthcare expertise and the general business expertise, pulling all of those resources to be able to answer your clients' questions as quickly and fully as possible in that time of need.
Okay, thank you, Jen. So Daniel, I know with your expertise in working with financial concerns, do you have any advice for our members of what they could do just to plan?
Let me unmute myself there. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most important thing, as has been alluded to several times, is you have to have a strong balance sheet. Oftentimes, when tragedy strikes or something, a disaster like this happens, you're most vulnerable. And Warren Buffett has said, when the tide goes out, you see who was naked. And he was referring to hedge funds and people who are over leveraged. But of course, it applies to your financial security as well. So the general rule for an emergency fund is to have 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up. And so that would be for personal individuals, but also for business owners. I know several of you lawyers are not only you have your personal finances, but also your business owners in owning your own firm or being a partner, etc. And so you want to make sure not only that you can pay your personal bills, but also that you can pay your business bills in paying yourself and in keeping the office going, if you have an office, or your ongoing expenses. And so for you, if you're a business owner, you want to have 3 to 6 months of your own personal expenses, so 3 to 6 months of your business expenses saved up. And there are many ways you can do this. You can put money into a Roth IRA, which is typically savings for retirement, but there are special occasions where you can take money out. So that way, you've got money in there, it's growing, it's in the markets, but if you absolutely need it, you can take it out for medical expenses and buying a first home and things like that. You also want to have money in a savings account. You can find an online savings account that will pay between 1% and 2%, which is it's small. It's nothing to really write home about, but that's your emergency fund, and so you've really got to have that. It's really important in a continuity plan, and so everyone should have a strong continuity plan that is not just something written in a folder stashed away somewhere in the office 10 years ago, but actually something that you look at every year and that is current and actionable. So if you are a partner of a firm, and I think the smaller the firm, really the more important this is, because the smaller you are, the more vulnerable you are to really problems. So if you have a partner, you should have an insurance policy, a life insurance policy for your partner. Because if they were to die, then how are you going to buy out their share of the practice? And you want to be able to buy out their share to make sure that their family is taken care of, and then you can then you own the firm, which is allows you other opportunities to bring in other partners for them to buy a portion from you or whatnot, and you can plan. And also, you need to make sure that kind of what they do. If they're the managing partner or involved in a lot of the management and paying the bills and things, ask them, hey, like, what do you do? Just like put it in a file somewhere, so that way if something were to happen to you, I can find this file and we can keep making sure that the firm is going to keep on going and things like that. Another thing to look at, which this is not as widespread as say a global pandemic, but something that happens a lot, is you could become disabled, and that's more of a risk than death. You're at more risk of becoming disabled than dying. And so I always encourage people, when looking for a disability policy, to get what's called an own occupation disability policy. So what that means is a lot of these policies will not pay out a benefit if you can find a job anywhere. So if you can go and work at McDonald's, let's say you suffered a brain injury and you can no longer have the cognitive power to be the high-powered lawyers that you are, but you could still work at McDonald's or something like that. The insurance policy will not pay you. But if you get what's called an own occupation policy, that policy will pay you if you can no longer do what you're doing now as lawyers. So that's very important to make sure that you're covered. A lot of times, you read the fine print. I'm speaking to the choir here, and so you all know that. But yeah, I would also say, kind of piggybacking on what Monica said about pivoting, is also, in the investing world, we talk about diversifying your investments a lot, which is great, and you should be doing that. But you can also diversify your income streams. And so, you have your lawyer's salary, and as you build that up and you build up your cash reserves and your emergency fund and your investments, you can also add to that rental houses, open up a brokerage account. So that's non-retirement savings that is growing on the side for you. So you have all of these kind of areas where your money is growing. And that way, when something like this happens, you have money to pay the bills, which is really the most important thing for a business continuity plan.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, I think this segues into the next question that I think Alicha is going to ask everyone related to changes in the pandemic. Alicha?
Thank you, Hetal. So, it's great. We talk a lot about finances, which is a huge part of being able to weather a disaster. But what are maybe some other side effects that you saw because of the pandemic that maybe you didn't expect? And Jen, I might start with you. Just, I know you've been working at home pretty much this whole time. What has that been like for you and having a family?
So yeah, I think that, just flexibility and asking and accepting for help. To my point earlier of client needs continue, of course, there's an element of humanity in this where it's like, if people need time to figure it out, they should take it. But in the end, you need to kind of figure it out fast because you still need to serve your clients. And so in my situation, we had relocated temporarily while schools were shut down for 2 weeks, and then fast forward, a year later, and they're still not normal. And so I think just trying to take a step back and balance your professional needs and your personal needs, and being open with both your professional colleagues and personal colleagues, and what you need and what's working and not working. And so for me, I kind of try to replicate my desk setup as quickly as I could, and to make sure to treat the day like I did when I'm in the office, where it's your work day and you don't see family normally during your work day. And I know in my situation, I have a fair amount of help, and I can't imagine how challenging it is for all these families that don't. But really just kind of realizing that everyone's in the same boat, whether their needs are children-centric or parent-centric or other job-centric, and just listening to what your clients' needs are and what your internal clients' needs are at the firm or company you work at, and just trying to do your best with the technology you have. And I think flexibility, as cliche as it sounds, is really just what has gotten us through it.
Ben, Monica, I don't know if you all have some thoughts, particularly maybe related to wellness concerns or technology or communication that you saw as a side effect that maybe wasn't quite at the forefront of the pandemic.
I was just reminded when Jen was speaking there that I still to this day can remember negotiating a loan closing on 9/11. And as we were learning things, and that lawyer and I have a very special relationship 20 years later, because we understood at that point we need to just give each other some grace and focus on what we can do in a time where focus was very, very hard. So that pivots kind of off what Jen said. It's important to keep perspective, and we say that word, but we really need to think about that word when we're not together. Zoom does help, but sometimes you get bogged down on, I just need to get this work done, or I'm worried about getting this work done for this client under these circumstances. The perspective that helps is, I can talk about it, I've got the gray hair. You will have crises throughout your career that are coming from the business world. you may, we hope you don't, but you may have personal challenges. You may have health challenges. You may have children with challenges. Challenges will be part of that. And so it is important to keep up your network if you have a network. And by that, I don't mean necessarily your VBA, group committee that you serve on. But if Hetal is really close to Alicha, that's a call where even though you're in different parts of the state, it's meaningful to hear from another lawyer to say, I'm not okay today. And it is essential for us to listen to each other and to also recognize that sometimes if we are not feeling the way we should, we need to go see somebody. And I think your generation has done a fantastic job of breaking down the stigma. But I think firms are starting to embrace the fact that an unwell lawyer is not performing well for the client. It's not performing well for the firm. And it's really something that as a colleague, I don't want to see someone who's unwell. And I hope if someone sees me just not performing like I should, now's the time to try to get help. Monica?
Yeah, I completely echo everything that's been said. I think that one of the things that we did not anticipate with this pandemic is not just the effects on families, which of course were huge. My husband and I have commented a few times that if we had had a young child, social services would have already taken them away. It would have been really bad for us dealing with young children. But even for, I think even more so, people who live alone, whether you're elderly or whether you're just a single person, this has really hit everyone in a unique way. And the isolation was just terrible. I'm really grateful that the state bar, the Supreme Court really started talking about wellness a couple years ago. I think it was timely. I think that wasn't necessarily, it was something we were conscious of, but not really, we didn't have like a vocabulary for it. Now we have a vocabulary for it, and it's more really on our radar. And so I'm glad that the Supreme Court really pushed that wellness initiative to help all of us, really be thinking about that. I will say that one of the surprises for me has been when everybody went home, my fear was, how was I going to get everybody back? And I thought people were going to say, I'm happy hunky-dory at home. I'm never coming back. This is like the best thing ever. I'm wearing my slippers and my flip-flops and sweatpants, to Supreme Court arguments. This is fantastic. And in truth, it was kind of the opposite. People really craved the social interaction, the parties, just going to lunch, having your colleagues next door to bounce ideas off of, like face to face. And so I was relieved in a way that people actually wanted to be together, and we're social creatures. That's what we do. So I hope that, that people really learned something from, I learned something from that. And I think we all maybe learned something from that it is that networking and being with other people, this is okay, but it's not a great substitute for being in person, and that connection. And I think like, again, like Ben said, the VBA just does a great job in fostering all those kind of relationships. Those are the relationships that you need. And those are the relationships that you'll have through your whole life to help you through the good times and the bad.
Thank you both for your perspective. And I'll definitely say too, from my point of view as a young lawyer who does live by herself in a huge house. At first I was all excited about going home. I was like, oh, I can spend 2 weeks on my deck enjoying the weather. And then 2 weeks turned into 3 months. And the isolation it was crushing. I'm very much a people person. And even though we would have associate happy hours and chats and phone calls, it took a lot of effort for me to figure out, okay, I've never been in this kind of situation before. I've never been forced to be alone pretty much 24/7, and just figuring out what worked for me to make it bearable, and then making a pact with my other associate friends that should this ever happen again, we will get together and just stay at each other's houses.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
Alicia, I think that's great. Your perspective on that is fantastic, and I hope that the law firms will also embrace that, and that the firms will do whatever they can do as well. I mean, I think we're all sort of learning through this process and a little bit surprised by kind of how it affected all of us. So I hope that there isn't a next time around, but if there is, that we as firms and more senior lawyers do a better job of really kind of being trying to find other ways for people to get together during difficult times like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Which Hetal is our next question.
Yeah, I was just about to say, this really segues very nicely into a question I have for all of you on the topic of social interaction and communication. How did you feel that clients responded to just the lack of face-to-face contact, increase in Zoom calls? What kind of feedback did you guys get from your clients?
I'm happy to start. I did not receive any negative feedback by the uptick in Zoom. And I know I've shared before, it actually seems like communications that pre-COVID were done by phone were for some reason done by Zoom. And that continues to this day. So where we definitely have missed some of the more informal and more fun social interactions with some of our clients from a marketing perspective, I feel like I see some of my clients more than I did before, only because maybe we have standing weekly calls that were by phone before and now by Zoom. So it's almost become, at least with my clients, the standard that when you schedule a call, you send the Zoom or the WebEx invitation instead of the phone. And I don't really know why that is, or how long it will continue, even if when things open up and in-person meetings are more the norm. But it's interesting because you'll see on these calls a split of folks who are clearly in the office or folks who are in an off-site location, whether it's their home or somewhere else, and you don't know the circumstances or if it's a chosen or why they're where they are. But I do wonder how long that will continue. So for us, it's been a good thing where we see them more, but I don't know. It's kind of unspokenly become the norm and expectation, and I don't really know why yet.
Ben, what have been your experiences?
I think they've been mixed. As a small firm, we're only 8 lawyers. We had some estate planning clients that I think the crisis really made them focus on that estate plan that they've been putting off finalizing for some time. That created just a logistics issue of how do we safely do that. That last maybe meeting to go over the will, where it may be a long chat and a talk about, just reaffirming everything, became almost a just sign this and get out. The clients actually did not want to interact too much because if they're elderly, they had their own fears. We had to set up stations, sanitize our pens, all that stuff. But I think that's an example of flexibility. We figured out a way to get it done. From real estate perspective, I think Zoom morphed into more Zoom and Zoom-like programs. And we're almost seeing a return back to the old conference call because Zoom had some inefficiencies in terms of everybody turning off their button. Maybe the bandwidth was an issue and you couldn't hear somebody. So it was mixed, but I think that what I would echo kind of to tie some other things back is however you can in a time of a crisis, do touch base. If you don't have standing appointments with a formalized client structure, for a small firm, it really means a lot to touch out to a client, reach out to them, schedule, let them know you're thinking about them, and then be creative and be open. Ask them what is causing them trouble. Ask them what they're seeing in the marketplace. You will be surprised that sometimes you may see solutions for that, and you've just invented work for yourself. My example is that, you know, when the economy's going great, everybody wants to come in and have an eminent domain case. And for the landowner, you know, the land's worth this much. Well, when the downturn happens, tax assessment and the land just reinvented work for yourself. So you have to think like that. And clients have to, you know, clients don't necessarily think like that, but we can. So whatever form of communication, you know, while you are kind of stuck in this weird, isolated atmosphere, have the perspective out and talk to your clients, and they will appreciate it, and talk to your colleagues because they will appreciate it, and we both need it.
Thank you so much, Ben.
If I can just follow up on that, I think to Ben's point, creativity is key. Given that all of my clients are in the healthcare field, they never wanted to meet in person in the past year. And a lot of our interactions with the various state departments at the Department of Health are hesitant when we or the client wanted to meet in person because they don't want to be in the news that they, you know, had some sort of in-person public hearing by the Virginia Department of Health and there was a COVID outbreak. So we've had to get really creative, knowing that from our client standpoint, we're arguably at a disadvantage when you can only hear people or they can see us, but we can't see them, for instance. And so even recently we got created with a blend of a video WebEx plus an audio WebEx plus a pre-recorded video of people who wouldn't be able to participate at the time of the WebEx, and, you know, just capabilities that we've never really utilized pre-COVID to try to be that advocate for your client and get the message across you want to get for them within the limitations that we're still in. So I think flexibility again and creativity have really been necessary to get past these hurdles in the past year.
That's great. Thank you, Jen. And I think that this also kind of naturally sort of helps us move on to the topic of, you know, how many of these communication changes will actually stick. And I believe Alicha is going to kind of delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Hetal. So, you know, we've talked a lot about what we can do to prepare, but just thinking about what changes we all made for the pandemic or because of the pandemic, what might be more permanent. But I want to start with Daniel. Daniel, you gave us some great advice about saving up funds and looking at even our personal finances, disability policies, things like that. Was there anything though in particular that you saw that was really affected by the pandemic that you think will be a more permanent change in how people handle their finances or how a business might handle their finances?
Yeah, well, it was almost like the government is, you know, giving so many rounds of stimulus and PPP and everything. It's almost like it was a financial, disaster, but everyone's still kind of okay because the government has it is keeping the ships afloat and the tide up. So I mean, if you were able to get PPP, if you were if you got the stimulus checks, if you didn't, then you're already making good money. So I think a lot of people were caught off guard in losing clients or having clients unable to pay, and that can catch a lot of people off guard. What's interesting is the stock market has just performed extraordinarily well in the past year. If we look back 13 months, that third week of March last year, the Dow Jones was down 32%. That was really scary. That was when we didn't know what COVID was going to be. We didn't know it. We thought it was going to kill millions and millions, which it may still, but it hasn't yet. And so we thought it was just going to be, terrible. So the stock market went so far down, and then we've seen the best recovery in such a short amount of time ever since then. And so people have the stimulus checks, they're at home bored, so they're hopping on Robinhood and all these trading platforms, and they're just throwing their money in there, which makes the prices go up even more. And so it's like free money for everyone, and we just keep winning. And so when will that stop? And also federal interest rates have been at all-time lows. And so people are, buying houses, which has made the real estate market go crazy. So the government is very efficient at keeping the economy strong, and basically bailing out the economy, which has worked great for all of us. But how long can they keep doing that? We have the student loan stay on forgiveness, going through September 30th. And so you don't have to pay on your student loans till then. So after, that ends, and after the stimulus checks end, and then there's a market correction, I think then that's when we'll start to see people start to panic, and then people will really need to have planned well. So I think, now is the time to plan well financially. You never need an insurance policy until, the triggering event. And so you want to have that before the triggering event. And so, the boat doesn't sink until there's a hole. So you want to make sure you have something to be able to plug that hole with. And that's why having an emergency account is so important. It's for emergencies, not for upgrading your car, unless your car, is total. Not for, buying those new products, shoes, or going on a shopping spree, but for emergencies. And so, to answer your question, how did it catch people off guard financially? I think it has surprisingly been a great year for a lot of people. Now, if they lost their job, that's another story. We saw a lot of that. And I think that's where, like Monica said, you need to be able to pivot and find another job, find another client, find another income source, do whatever it takes to get back on the ground again and keep charting a path forward.
Alicha, just to follow on that, there's a message from the more senior lawyers to the younger lawyers that is, you are extremely valuable, and you can make yourself more valuable by seeing some of these trends and trying to figure out whether or not they're here to stay. A lot of these trends may be here to stay in part. A lot of these trends may have already been underway, but COVID accelerated them. And just examples are, digital payments. Digital payments is something that if you're in the financial world, even if you're we're going to be asked, do you take Bitcoin pretty soon, right? And I can't speak for Monica, but I'm going to go, no, I'm going to have to ask somebody else about that. But if we look at remote work and then some things that governments did during the pandemic, we relaxed dining restrictions, we had takeout beverages. Those all involved regulatory changes. Those all involved lawyers being in the middle of that process. A lot of governments and industries are asking, should we keep these type of restrictions relaxed? So that's an example of the future is going to play itself out differently. And to the extent that technology is such a central part of that, you are going to serve yourself very well, even if you're a solo or in a small firm or in a large firm, embracing that fact that technology is going to be part of the change. And how can I help my other lawyers, or how can I help my firm and my clients work better, work smarter, use this technology, or even see some of these trends? A lot of folks are moving, and I'm in the real estate world. A lot of folks are moving from large metropolitan areas that are extremely expensive, like New York and San Francisco. And Virginia is seeing its fair share. So, how do you recognize those trends? That trend is going to play itself out. But that's a great example of, if you're practicing mindfulness, you've cleared your head, and you actually have the ability to say to a partner like Monica, hey, Monica, I have an idea. Now, even if you give Monica 3 ideas and 2 of them are just they're non-starters, Monica's going to remember the good one and say, that's worthy of further study. So that's just an example on how you persevere through the peaks and valleys of, again, we hope this crisis starts to tail off significantly in 2021. But boy, 2020 was a year that none of us will ever forget.
Well, and I'll just say, make one comment, picking up kind of on what Ben said about technology. I hope that one permanent change from COVID, and COVID's not going to be permanent, this is not permanent, but that one permanent change is across the board at law firms, a greater appreciation and openness to flexible work arrangements and remote working. So today I'm home because I have a horrible commute to work. So, but I think that's, being more open to that, I think that's what we're going to see across the board. Not that people will work, completely remotely for everybody, but more flexibility in terms of understanding how those types of work arrangements are better for a firm and for an individual lawyer, even if it's just once a week or a couple times a month or something like that. So I hope that's one of the changes that we see.
I can't resist kind of continuing to follow up on that, where it has been very, very hard on younger lawyers with children, with young children particularly. And so I think it's important to say to you young lawyers with children, we hear you, but it's also important, Monica, it's a competitive world out there. One of my right hand associates just is so thankful that we are flexible, but that's a part of why she's been with us for years and is not interested in leaving. If other firms are not embracing that type of flexibility, I think that the firms that do embrace that kind of flexibility and grace are going to be stronger in the future, and you may see moves among younger lawyers. And that's unfortunate, but I think that some firms have a 1970s outlook for a 2020 environment, and I don't think it cuts it.
So before we get to our last question, I don't see any questions in the chat, but I just wanted to let people know we have about 10 minutes left. And so please ask us your questions if you do, and I'll let Hetal take the last question for us.
Thanks, Alicha. In looking at, the positive side of some of the changes that we have seen since the pandemic has started, I can speak for myself and just sharing with everyone that one of the things that I noticed after the pandemic hit, everything kind of shut down for a while, is just the reunification of family, from spending hours on the soccer field and rushing from thing to thing. There was a period of time where we all went on walks and kind of cherished some of those, I guess some of those values or things that maybe we did as children. Do any of you have anything that you would like to share just from a wellness, perspective of something positive?
I'll echo that. I think one thing, and to the last question too, about what may be here to stay or should or shouldn't be, is as we re-emerge into pre-COVID, which will obviously be a long process, I think it enables folks to be intentional about the life they go back to. I know in the beginning of COVID, there were many things that I did not miss. To Monica's point, the commute, the hustle and bustle of getting non-obedient small children out the door in the morning, and myself looking semi-professional to my job. I don't miss that. The inevitable committees that we're all on and community boards and activities that were kind of paused. So unless you stick with the I'm just going to work and I'm just going to do family, we're all going to re-immerse ourselves into society. But I think that what I'm going to try to do for me from a wellness standpoint is to be intentional about what I re-immerse myself into so that I can be a good client advocate, a good partner, employee, and a good parent, maybe leaving some stuff behind pre-COVID that I just don't miss. And that is not critical to doing my job or my home life.
I would echo that there are a lot of positives that came out of this. I mean, just to keep my sanity or my alleged sanity during the really a VBA friend who would actually send me a picture of a pie that he'd baked every day. And he really sharpened his cooking skills. And I spread that on to another colleague, and we eventually had kind of a men's competition going. What could you do during that day? So we all gained a little weight, but we did have some distraction, which is a mental strategy to just, I mean, honestly, you've got to put the stuff down. And that is important to talk about when you are working at home and then living at home. It is tempting to take the iPhone with you, to take the iPad with you, to be with your family in the living room and keep working. You need to establish some boundaries and establish some good habits. But again, kind of the humor aspect of it is, you know, whether you're sending each other pies, or another group of us did geographic trivia to keep ourselves from going insane. Again, arguable whether that worked or not. It is important to keep that balance. You've got to laugh every once in a while. You may have to cry every once in a while. But Hetal's question is excellent. I think you asked it, is how do we keep some of the good things from COVID in our wheelhouse when we move forward? And we're going to have to just remind each other of things like that. A walk in the park is so restorative. And youth soccer, well, that's got its own special parts, but that's all about perspective. And perspective is a fluid concept, and it often involves interaction and how we can help each other maintain perspective. So,
and to kind of add to that question, to kind of broaden it a little bit, you know, on a positive note, you know, we have law school graduates that, you know, graduating at a very difficult time. Do you guys have any advice for those people that are looking for a job, you know, in a downturn economy?
I love this question because it makes me think of a very successful young lawyer in my region that is now the named partner in his own firm. During the 2008 recession, he went door to door in Leesburg and knocked, looking for a job. And you may say, oh, that sounds pretty pathetic, but the market was really bad during that time, particularly in areas if you were hit with higher. Anyway, my point to that is, don't forget old-fashioned ways of networking. It's not the first person you meet, it's who that person may know. And what played out is I didn't have a job for him. He wanted to work in domestic relations, but I knew another, he needed help. So I put the two of them together. They would have never gotten together necessarily if this young lawyer hadn't had the gumption to just go out and expose himself and ask, if you don't have a job, do you know someone else who may? Or do you know someone who I might be good to talk to? That kind of old-fashioned marketing never goes out of style. Emails always run the risk of going to a spam folder. Emails are easy to depersonalize. So I'm a big advocate for, if you have an idea of something you like, ask people. Monica Monday knows 1 million people. Jen Ligon knows 1 million people. Everybody, that's part of the VBA network, and the VBA value is we know a lot of people. I may not be the answer, but I may know someone. So that's my 2 cents. Is it's always a tough market. There are a lot of lawyers out there, but if you're good and focused, you can find a place to be.
I'll say too that I completely agree with everything Ben said. And I think that one thing that us older folks can say is, just like with the old, a lot of opportunities out there. There are many firms who are still hiring. I think, in fact, I think in watching sort of the job announcements, it looks like things are starting to open up. Plus, don't forget, you lawyers who want to stay in Virginia, the Court of Appeals legislation, which is going to expand the Court of Appeals by an additional 6 judges, and they actually have 1 that's vacant, so it's 7 judges. Those new judges may need law clerks. And I can also assure you that at the Attorney General's office in Virginia, they're hiring, I think, close to 30. They need to hire 30 new lawyers to help deal with the caseload that's going to come from the right of appeal that every litigant is now going to have in the Court of Appeals of Virginia. So there are going to be opportunities out there. If you want to contact me, I can put you in touch with someone at the Attorney General's office. And those judges, the new judges, will probably be picked, I think, sometime this summer. I will also say that I was a product of a bad economic downturn in the early 1990s. When I graduated from law school, I was in a judicial clerkship at that time. I could not get the job that I wanted, and so I asked my judge if I could stay another year, and he said yes. So because of that, that helped me to kind of weather the storm and get to where I wanted to be. So be flexible. Don't hesitate to ask. If you're in a clerkship right now, ask if you can stay another year. There may be other opportunities, but like Ben said, you don't know unless you ask.
That is great advice. Jen, what about you from a young lawyer's perspective? Do you have any insight that you could offer law school graduates?
I think so. This is obviously self-serving, but get involved in an organization like the VBA or your local bar. I know I've told the story before of a young gentleman who is in law school now, and I've just been very impressed with the consistency with which he reaches out during a very hard time. No like woe is me communications, just hey, wanted to check in. He remembers things about me. How's remote working? How's remote school? Here's what's going on with me, my internship from last summer. Oh, I heard about the YLD doing a seminar on this, or he's interested in health law. I heard about the health law section, and he attends, and I see in the participant column on these webinars. So, you know, he may not have the in-person summer experience or the in-person meetings, but he really is keeping his name out there and communicating with a wide array of attorneys in the field that he thinks he wants to practice in. So kind of going back to a lot of the themes that have been discussed, the flexibility and the going back to old school communication style, and just really looking for creative ways to pivot, whether it's substantive wise or location wise, and just making himself available. So find a way to get involved. And obviously the VBA is a great way for that, but other organizations as well to meet people, to Ben's point, because I may not be able to help them, but I certainly know a fair number of healthcare attorneys who may be able to help him depending on where he wants to live and the type of law he wants to practice. So just get involved.
There's also another thing I forgot about the VBA. If we can make another pitch though, we have a career center on our homepage, and I believe job seekers can post resumes there for free, and that's a nationwide reach. And that is important because, again, Virginia is one state in this great country, and more companies are looking for. North Carolina seems to be busy. Other states are looking for young lawyers as well, but we'd love for you to stay in Virginia.
That is great.
All
Well, I
right, well,
think-
that puts us just after 1 o'clock, and I think Yvonne put in the chat the link for the Job Career Center. Thanks for bringing it up, Ben. But thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Richard, for letting us do this. Thanks, Hetal, for keeping me in line to get this all together. I really appreciate you guys coming, and for our panelists for helping out. I would say give them a round of applause, but here we are on Zoom. So thank you all, and hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody. I think this was so informative. I, for one, learned a lot of great advice. So thank you all for your wealth of expertise. I know our members definitely will take something away home today from all the great suggestions. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.